ACNFers, if you want signed, personalized copies of The Frontrunner for the holiday season, email me, creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com, and then I will reply with a PayPal invoice and ask you how you want your book personalized. It'll be $30 total, and that covers media rate shipping while supplies last.
You know, part of you is like, is it worth it?
ACNFers, we're moving headstrong into the holiday season. 2025 is almost over, so there's still time to fulfill those New Year's resolutions. Actually, just give up. Wait for 2026 at this point, B.O. You'll drink less and lose those pesky 20 pounds. I know it. And manifest the career of your dreams next year. I know it. It's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell, as they tattle about the tactics of typing. Fuck, I don't know. Wow. 499. Who do we have? Kevin, tell me. It's Maggie Mertens. Maggie is the author of Better, Faster, Farther, How Running Changed Everything We Know About Women, Algonquin Books. It's a brilliant book that traces the advancement of women's athletics through running. Hard as it is to believe, but it was thought that women couldn't, nay, shouldn't, run farther than 800 meters. Running might affect their fragile constitution. They might even ruin the workplace. There's a name for headlines like that one. I think they're called subscription cancelers. Context: the New York Times ran a podcast headline with its conservative columnist asking, did women ruin the workplace? Anyhoo, Maggie is making the freelance workplace a good time, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to get to celebrate her approach to the work in her incredible book that came out in 2024. Show notes of this episode and more at brendanamara.com. Hey, bookmark it so you can browse for hot blogs. Just published a blog called Don't Wish the Miles Away. I tell you, it's just fun to feed your website the best of you, not social media algorithms. And sign up for my two very important newsletters, the flagship Rage Against the Algorithm and Pitch Club. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. Also, if you care to support the podcast with a few dollar bills, visit patreon.com/CNFpod. We had a great Procrasti-Zoom happy half hour with 5 people, including me. People from Spain, Canada, Nebraska, and New York. It was an international affair, and we just hung out, talked about writing, and went on our way. Become a paid member to get access to these and perhaps more structured Procrasti-Zooms down the road. So Maggie's work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, NPR, ESPNW, Creative Nonfiction, among others. She has a Substack called My So-Called Feminist Life at maggiemertens.substack.com. She does much of her social media-ing on Instagram at Maggie J. Mertens. And you can learn more about her and her work at maggiemertens.com. So in this conversation, Maggie and I talk about the long book writing process, community, time pegs, strict deadlines for the self, how she named her chapters in Better, Farther, Faster, Better, Faster, Farther. Fuck. Taking the wins, and the post-book Malaise. Parting shot on our websites. But for now, I just suppose we cue up that montage and get on with it, all right? Riff.
Tell it to me like you're watching a movie.
One tiny lowercase LOL will fucking sail me through.
Editing is about helping the writer think.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
You know, I think maybe a fun place for us to jump off of, Maggie, is like when ahead of the book event we did that you graciously emceed at Elliott Bay Books, and we were talking about Faith's attempt at the sub 4, breaking 4 and everything. And you wrote a really cool Substack about it, and then you had thoughts about how it was packaged and everything. And I think it would just be kind of a fun place to jump off of. Just, it's got women's running, it's got a really sort of empowering goal, but it didn't really, it's something wrong. It didn't quite ring right for you about it. And that might be just a good place for us to just launch into whatever we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So, yeah, pretty much the best woman's miler in the world right now, the one who keeps kind of pushing the world record lower and lower. Nike set up this big, they called it a moonshot race, basically an exhibition where she would run a mile with all these pace setters and try to be the first woman to run a sub 4 minute mile. And it was really exciting. Like, there were so many exciting things about it, just in terms of, like, I mean, having a ton of attention on a woman runner who was doing something cool, and so many people I know watched it, like even people who aren't like big runner fans, or would like, they because they streamed it as it happened. And it was really exciting. It's kind of like, oh, you can watch a world record in action, and how often do you get to do something like that? And but at the same time, it felt a little bit like a like a Nike commercial in its own way,
Yeah.
which of course Nike loves to do and is very good at. And framed it as this thing that felt, that sounded impossible, right? And that, like, it must be impossible for a woman to run a sub 4 minute mile. Which in some ways I think sort of sets up this idea that, like, oh, well, why has it taken so long when a man first ran a sub 4 in the 1950s? And so you kind of like end up with this whole women trying to prove themselves as athletes only by achieving the things that men have achieved, right? So some of that sometimes bothers me, just because it's women athletes are amazing for what they do, and we don't have to like achieve the same things that men do. And that it sort of felt like, well, if a woman is going to do this sub 4 minute mile, like, she needs all of this help. Like, she needs these like special shoes and special, clothes, and a sports bra that's like 3D printed and all of this stuff. And she couldn't possibly do it without them and this cadre of like male pace runners. So that part was a little bit, to me, also fed into this idea that, like, oh, well, a woman would never really be able to do this. This wouldn't be like a real record. She needs all this help just to try to do this thing that, men do all the time now.
Well, it harkens back to even when Roger Bannister broke, the 4 minute barrier. Like, he needed a lot of pacers to get him through it too. So it's back then, I guess some people think these things were manufactured. We're like, well, yeah, that was very much manufactured, as was Faith's attempt. It doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't discredit the achievement that was made, but yeah, sometimes it does take a village to take aim at these records.
It really does. And, that's really one of the things that I learned about running while I was researching this book, is that, people think of it as an individual sport, but it's such a team sport in so many ways. And it really does depend on, who you're running against, who is setting the pace, who is running out front, what's your style, all of that kind of thing all plays into it, because running isn't just like press play and it happens. Like, there's so many other things that go into it, which is why, like, it might seem, I don't know, straightforward or boring to some people, but it's in fact just so complicated.
Well, and speaking of the team sport aspect, I often liken writing and this mess we've gotten ourselves into as a kind of team sport too. So in what ways do you see writing and writing community, especially freelance writing, as a team sport?
Oh, 100%. I think when you start, right, as a freelancer, you do feel really kind of on your own, and you are, right, you're like reaching out to editors, you're just a person that you have to like convince them of who you are, all of that. But eventually you start to create, I mean, it becomes about relationships, right? People always ask me, oh, how do you write for these places? How do you write for The Atlantic or Sports Illustrated or whatnot? And it's because I've made relationships with those editors, right? And those are people that then come back and ask me to do other things after I've done something like pitch them a story 800 times 10 years ago, then they know, oh, this is something you're interested in, and we know you can turn around and do this. And then the other thing is also having other, peers and friends who are also freelancers and who can commiserate and relate. I have a really close friend from grad school who is also a freelance writer and a nonfiction book writer, and she and I have just kind of made it our work day is that we check in with each other. We check in and we see what we're all working on, if we can support each other in any way, that kind of thing. And that's, just having someone else to be like, you're not crazy. Yes, they should have gotten back to you by now. Or like, no, this is actually a good idea and you should send it to someone, is really helpful, right? And I think as I've gotten older and more experienced in this, I've been doing freelance writing now for more than 10 years. I've really come to respect and understand that like it's not about talent, right? It's not about like just like who's the best writer gets all these assignments. It's so much about what connections are you making, what are you going for? Like what are like there's so many things I don't even try for because I'm too nervous or don't think it's for me. And you don't know these things until you try, and having that community support is really helpful in terms of people keeping your head on straight and just like knowing that, okay, just because you didn't win some prize or a grant or whatever doesn't mean you should quit at this point, which is I think often how we feel.
For sure. Well, what can you point to as an early win in your writing career?
Oh, well, I mean, I think you have to have those wins, especially early on, to keep you going, right?
Big time. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about a few different ones. One of the actually really early things that happened was when I was still in undergrad. So this was like mid 2000s. I studied abroad in Italy, and I had a blog because this was like blog days, and this was just kind of something I always did was write online or write in a journal or whatever it was, and I knew I wanted to do this as a for a living, and really the blog was mostly for like my family back home to know that I was like there. And an editor at actually like an alternative weekly in San Diego, they kind of at the time were publishing like blogs. Like it was one of their things was like, oh, we're gonna find like blogs of people doing cool writing and publish some of them. And so they published a few of those from my time abroad, which was really fun, and was one of those things like, oh, I could be a writer. And I got paid like a few $100s, and it was like very exciting because I hadn't even graduated yet. Then of course I like graduated into the recession and things were very not easy. We're good. But then later on, I think starting out as a freelancer, my big win was placing my first piece with The Atlantic, which was actually all about women's soccer. And, this was kind of the time before the fight for pay equality. And it was sort of a call out of like, we need people to know like how poorly these women are being paid ahead of the World Cup. And at that time, it was pretty striking, and the NWSL was very very new, very fledgling, and these women were being paid in some places like $12,000 for the season and things like that. And so it was kind of this call out for looking at soccer, at women's sports, as more of a feminist issue and more of like this pay gap that we're all concerned about in all of our economy is something that's like happening at an extreme level in women's sports.
You said like when you were starting this blog, and you got a sense that this was something you wanted to do. What was that moment or the impetus? You're like, oh yeah, I do want to make a career writing.
Yeah, for me it was pretty early on. When I was in high school, I joined the school newspaper because I had to fill a class, and and like it was like some credit I needed, and I was like, sure, I'll do the newspaper. And like the first few things that I wrote, it was so amazing that like I would write something and people would ask me about it. Like people would read it. And then later, I was just like, this is too cool. Like I just loved it. And it was always like, weird stories about like calling out hypocritical like rules at the school or things like that, you know, speaking truth to power, that kind of stuff. And you know, it really did, it was kind of addictive to be like, oh, this is a thing I can do. I'm not like a organizer or something like that, but like writing as a way of like spreading ideas and pointing things out that are wrong was just like very addictive for me. And yeah, so I knew that journalism was something I really wanted to at least consider as a career path. And as I kind of continued on in college doing school newspaper stuff, that just became like, okay, like this is something that I'm like fairly good at and enjoy. And there is like, I think it felt like a very real career path. Like, okay, there's a skill, I'm learning it, and then I'll get a job to do it. Like, that will be great. I will take all these steps. And, you know, of course it didn't really turn out that way, but that's what I really, really loved about it at first.
You know, in this line of work, there are just myriad frustrations and they're always like looking for the off ramps of this freeway we've gotten ourselves on. And I've looked at any number of off ramps over the years, and it always pulls me back on. You know, I always get back on the highway. But you know, so like, you know, just for you, what are some frustrations that you deal with as a freelancer? Yeah, that sometimes really wants to pull you off the highway, but you still find yourself in it.
Ugh. Like, isn't that an everyday occurrence?
I know.
It's like,
I know, and we don't have 5
Googling
hours to
what
talk
else,
about it too.
what other career can I have with my skill set? Should I go back to school? All of those things. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the biggest frustration for me right now is the fact that the industry is not, I mean, of course it's like contracting, but it also has done such a poor job of keeping and maintaining talent, right? Like, not just like paying well for writers, you know, to stories that, you know, I've had stories on huge national magazine platforms that do really, really well. And I turn around and I cash my $800 check for it, you know, and I'm like, I know that this is not a fair trade, right? This is not how I should be being treated for this. And I think honestly, like if the general public knew how little freelancers were paid for these kinds of like huge national magazine articles, they would be shocked. Like, this is just like, it's so absurd. And it's really like the pay rate for me. And it hasn't, I mean, I will say in some places it's gotten better over the past 10 years. And what has really gotten better over the past 10 years is payment, just like actually getting payment and getting payment on time has gotten so much better. And I think because New York passed all these laws that actually had teeth to them. And so then all these publications had to figure out how to actually pay freelancers on time and keep track of it. But I will say when I was starting out, that was such a huge problem. I mean, you could have had something that published 6 months to a year ago and you were still chasing payment for it. And that was like absurd, right? But it just goes to show that, you know, as when journalism and nonfiction writing became this kind of freelance marketplace, I mean, it was a race to the bottom, right? Like real quick. And it just makes you as the writer feel like totally disposable. And like, okay, well, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not doing it for the fame and glory. But it is something I believe in. So I guess I'll keep at it. And yeah, so I guess that for me, the lack of stability, you know, I have 2 kids, so I am like responsible for other humans. And you know, for now, like my partner has had a good steady job, but you know, there's always that in the back of your head of like, what happens if that goes away? I don't know whether I'd be able to continue on doing this.
I know what you mean. It's like my wife is the breadwinner by far, and she has the health insurance and the steady job. I love that you brought that up, and I love bringing it up whenever I can because it's something that's not talked about very often. About, you know, there's often this the steady paycheck and that health insurance is what kind of allows us as writers to weather these ups and like big valleys, and then okay, something comes in and it's more like seasoning in the household budget, and in some ways in that regard, it's good to hear. It's just good to hear you talk about that, because a lot of people just feel so crummy that like, how is that person doing that? Like,
Yeah.
it's like well, yeah, well, there's some domestic institutional support that allows it to happen most cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to talk about that too as much as I can, because I think it's really important. And I do think, it's important to look at, at marriage as like a business partnership as much as it is,
Yeah.
an emotional and other another support kind of partnership, because it is, right? Legally, that's kind of what you're getting into. And I think for women, often we're kind of like taught like, oh, it's like almost shameful to be like depending on your spouse for something like this, at this point when, like we are also expected to like be career people and all of that. But it's like, it's the system, it's not us. It's not my personal failing that like
Yeah.
this career that I'm in is very unstable, but that it is worth talking about, and not feeling bad about, but figuring out what it is that you are both bringing or like responsible for. And I like, we often consider my salary, like what I take home, is the extra stuff, right? It's like, okay, do the kids get to do piano lessons and swim lessons, and do we get to go on vacation this summer? Like, those are the kinds of things where like he's paying those steady bills that happen every month, because
Yeah.
that income is steady, and that's what makes sense, right?
For sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so often too with women, such as my understanding is, like, a lot of caretaking falls to you, and that could be with children, but it could also be with like aging parents too, and that's just a
Absolutely.
whole other wrinkle that can that can just befall, women in general, but especially like freelancing women. It's like, I don't know how
Oh
anyone gets any
yes.
work done or
Yes,
anything fulfilling
yes.
done.
I have a friend who's a writer, a novelist, and she told me a long time ago, she's like, watch out, because if you're the freelance writer of the family, like everything will fall to you, because people assume you don't work for real.
Yeah.
You don't have a real job. So when your mom is sick, you're the person that has to take care of her and go to the hospital and all of that. And it's so true. Like, when I have family in town, I feel so like, okay, well, I guess everyone's expecting me to take care of them and take them around, because I don't have a real job. Even though
Yeah.
I'm like sitting there with 800 things in my to-do list. But so yeah, that's always an interesting one, is figuring out those, having a flexible job is awesome for those reasons. Like, it is great to be able to take the day off and take your family around or whatever. But at the same time, like, you actually do have to have some work in there
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Well, how do you impart structure on your day, so you can get those things done, and to, make it feel like, you're able to get some things done around, the nooks and crannies of, your day to day.
Oh, this is the question of my life, is how to impart structure on my day.
Right.
When like, I do love structure, like I crave structure, but I also feel really like claustrophobic around structure. So I think that's part of why I never loved having, like, the few times that I did have real jobs and had to go into offices, I hated it. Like, it it drove me crazy to be like, why do I have to do this if like I don't have anything on my schedule today, or like I can
Yeah.
finish this work in 3 hours? Why do I have to sit here for another five? All of that. So
Yeah.
for me, it's really been about, I mean, I have like an actual office in my house that I can like shut the door, and I have to like remind myself on most days to just like leave everything there. Once I do like school drop off, I just kind of like leave the breakfast dishes out, don't clean the kitchen. I have to shut the door and like figure out my day first, or just like dive right in. And I'm a big like list maker. I do a lot of like, this is my to-do list, these are the things that I'm going to get done today. And it depends. Like if I have big projects, either big freelance projects or like when I was working on the book, I'm very like calendar oriented. So it was very like, I need to break this all down into whatever it is. If I have a big feature due, when do I have to have the interview done by? Okay, I'll do this. Then I need to find all of my sourcing by this date. Then I need to finish the writing by this date, right? So that's often how I'm working, which feels really good to me because it kind of changes all the time and sort of depends on my workload. But having like, I wish I was more organized in terms of like overall workflow and all of that. The other thing I try to do is I try to break up my day in terms of like getting a big chunk of stuff done in the morning, then either like taking a break to exercise or to, make myself lunch, something like that, and then like getting back into it for like a little afternoon session. And sometimes that's more like reading and research and stuff like that in the afternoon. I like to do that because then the kids come home and it's really hard to get anything else done.
I bet.
But yeah.
Is it kind of like the morning is, in terms of your rhythms, that's where you get a lot of maybe your active stuff done, and then in the afternoon is maybe more more passive research or passive work?
I think so. I mean, if I have like actual writing that needs to get done, I try to do it in the morning. Often I get really pulled into email. I think email is like the death of all all creativity.
Yeah, that and
Um,
social media for
yeah,
sure.
oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, I've had to just like I have to like just not be on social media for the most part. Like it's just really hard for me at this point to get, I think, yeah, because it just pulls you in and you're like, oh well, I'm working. I'm like building my my
Yeah.
platform. I need to do this. But yeah, it's been the death of creativity or like having actual time to sit and write. But giving myself like actual time, like timed sections to like, okay, I'm gonna write for 20 minutes, gonna turn my timer on, then I'm gonna take 5 minute break and I'm gonna do it again, is often how I have to kind of like get that stuff done until I'm in the rhythm and in it. And sometimes that means I can come back to it in the afternoon if I'm like mid flow. Um, but then, with a lot of the freelance work I do, I need to do so many interviews, and it's like scheduling those is always like, okay, well,
Yeah.
that's going to interrupt your day. Like, like, and it's on them, right? It's like, it's their schedule usually that takes precedence. So,
I hate that when you're trying to leave a few voicemails but you don't want to get too deep into anything else because they could call back at any time. And it's just,
yes.
there's no way to get into that rhythm. Yeah, unless you just expect, like, okay, I'm giving these people a 3-hour window to call me back. What can I do? That's not going to matter if I get taken out of that. It's you're always doing the
Yes.
math like that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it is, and for me, I get really like, I get pretty anxious about interviews, not while I'm doing them, but before they happen, I get a little
Oh, well,
anxious.
yes.
So I have to kind of like prep and prep and prep. And then, yeah, if they don't answer, you're like, great. Now what? Now I'm all amped and ready to go. What can I do
Yeah.
with this energy? Yeah, it is hard. It is hard. That's often when I turn to email.
Oh my gosh. I think we're really vibing here because, like, I have such anxiety around phone calls. Oh, God, we're journalists and we have, like, isn't that like the basis of the job? Like,
I
it sure is, and
know.
it sucks. And a
I think
cold
it's pretty
calling, I
common
will
though
put it
too.
off. I'll put off a call for days. I mean, if I'm not like on a super deadline, I haven't been on a
Yeah.
super deadline for a long time, but if I don't have that extra deadline, like I'll write it down and then I will stew over the call for a long time before I actually just say like, fuck Brendan, like, fuck you, make the damn
Yeah.
call. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? I have to have these like halftime pep talks in my head to make a friggin' phone call. It's so stupid.
Yes. Yes. No, I think it's what's so strange is I do think it's pretty common when some of it is right. Like actually that's a huge part, like that's kind of what our work hinges on, is making
Big
sure
time.
that we can like have these interviews and do well and get what we need out of them. And sometimes you only get one shot. And so there is a lot of pressure. But, then I almost kind of take the like I just trick my brain into I'm not doing anything important, and just like dial the number without like looking. And then once you're on, you're like, oh, I know how to do this. I've been here before. For the most part, there are some that don't go so well still, but like that's just
Yeah.
part of the job.
Yeah. I know, like, if this is such a weird analogy, but if I have to drill wall anchors into my wall, I'm always a bit like skittish at first. But then I do like 5 or 6 of them, like, oh, this is pretty easy. But that's like the same thing with cold calling. If I get 1 or 2 done, and most often I go to the voicemail anyway because my number's weird and people are like, and so you're off the hook most of the time. And then you just do like 3, 4, 5. When I was in book research, a dozen a day. Almost no one picked up. It's like, oh, this is easy.
Yeah.
Just do it. This is the job.
Yeah.
I'm doing it, B.O. B.O., you're doing it. You're an awesome writer. You're an awesome journalist.
Yes.
But if I go a couple of weeks without it, I'm like, how do you drill the hole into the wall again? I don't want to do this and have to spackle over it. It's just like anything, it's just repetition.
Yeah, no, totally. It is repetition. And it's like you forget it as soon as you turn it off for a minute. It's like, oh crap, I don't want to start this again. I might drill the hole in the wrong spot.
Yeah, gonna hit some wires. Like, oh shit. So when did you start getting book ambitions and wanting to take up that kind of a project?
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that I did when I was kind of floundering, trying to get a job in my post-college career, I ended up going to an MFA program that was an evening program so that I could kind of like still work, but I knew I needed something that would like continue to make me believe like, okay, I can write. I might have something else. And part of that was that I've just always been a big book person, a big creative nonfiction person. And so part of like also the struggle for me in finding a job in journalism was that like I didn't want to be a newspaper reporter. I wanted to do these like more magazine-y or like long form or alt weekly style, like things that are, a little bit more conducive to book writing. And so I kind of saw the MFA as like a way to learn that skill, or at least like convince myself that I could find an avenue for this, even though like all of everything else was sort of dying at the time. And so I did that while I was doing kind of a web production job. And during the program, it was 2 years, and I kind of started writing like my first book project, which never got finished or published. But taught me how to like think about a book, right? And think about chapters and think about flow and narrative and all of that. And yeah, I mean, really since then, I was always like, oh, what might I write a book about? And when I got pulled into kind of this whole idea of writing about women athletes and all of this inequality, I was like, well, I know there's a book here somewhere. But it took a long time. I mean, it took a long time of writing about it freelance. And then, I ended up having an agent reach out to me who really wanted to help me come up with a project together. And that was just a godsend because, I mean, as we all know, like just, I think the agent process is so backwards and so messed up for like most writers. Is like, oh, you have to come up with your own idea and know how to write a book proposal on your own so that an agent thinks it's good enough to sell. Like, no, like that's what an agent does is it's like make the book proposal and like make sure your idea can sell and all of that kind of stuff. So I've been really, really lucky in that regard, and especially lucky because she worked with me kind of for years. And as I sort of plugged along in this research of like women athletes and where was this going to go, and would just kind of send her things every now and then. And we finally, I think it took, let's see, 5. I was pregnant with my first kid when we first started working together, and he was in kindergarten. He was 4 when the book sold. Yeah, he was 4 when the book sold. So it took 4.5, almost 5 years to just get the idea like together and the book proposal done, and I think that was like my third or fourth version of the book proposal that finally sold, um, and then yeah, another like 2 years of writing it and all of that before it came out. So it was something that I just really liked doing, and I know a lot of people like really don't like the book writing process, but I love it. I felt like this is like what my brain is good at, is this kind of like really big picture, chop it up into little pieces and dig into every single one. So that's just, it was really joyful for me.
Nice. Well, yeah, take us to that process of how, yeah, just the mechanics of writing a book really resonated with your taste and your makeup as a writer. So yeah, as you were leaning into your first book on women in running, yeah, how did the work look like for you, the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, it was really amazing because I'd been doing the research for so long. I had such a good kind of handle on the context that I wanted to tell, like all of this history that I knew kind of like belonged in the book, and it was really about in those first kind of weeks with my publisher, just sort of like nailing down, okay, these are the narrative elements, these are the dates and the moments that we're going to zoom in on, and this is the way that it's the story is going to be told and lay out. And it really fell together in that way. Like the organization of it felt really natural, probably just because I'd spent so much time in it in the topic. And then for me too, I'm like very almost kind of like mathematical about it, in terms of like, this is what it is going to be in each chapter, like this amount of like history, this amount of story, this amount of like scientific context, and like these are the one or two characters that I'm going to follow. And so I really had like a bulletin board of index cards that were very like color coded, like these are each section for each chapter, and this is how I have to go through it. And I also was working on a normal deadline, which was like 18 months, but it was pretty firm because I knew I wanted it to come out in the Olympic year for the summer. And once I then found out too that it was going to be 2024 was going to be the 40th anniversary of the first ever women's Olympic marathon, I was like, okay, we need like this has to come out at this point. And writing a women's sports book, like this is like, I've already been told this is going to be impossible to like sell. So, I need some hooks in this. And, the Olympics is just one of those times that I knew I needed it to come out then to get like any kind of grip on anyone. So I had really strict deadlines for each chapter for myself, and I turned them into my editor kind of on a rolling basis, and we went from there. But yeah, it was really, I liked that because it felt very like I knew what I needed to do every day. I knew what I needed to do every month. I could do it. And then it was just, I liked the process of it all. It felt very like good for me and my workflow, which is like, like I said earlier, I sometimes just struggle with like, if you're not sure what you're supposed to be doing that day, like it's gone, right?
Yeah. It's just a
So
constant email
that.
refresh loop
Yes.
over and over again. Gosh.
Yes. So I love that about the book.
Yeah. Well, I love how you structured it. Like, so your introduction is like women can't run, but every subsequent chapter, it's like, but not more than 100 meters. And it's like, but only white women, but not a mile, but definitely not a marathon. And it builds and builds and builds like that. So how did you lock into that as your central spine, that the structure through which you were going to funnel all this information?
That's so funny because it really just like came to me immediately, and I wrote it out to my editor, and I really thought like, oh, they're gonna change, like we won't really call those chapters this,
Yeah.
like this. And then it just stayed throughout the whole process, and I was like, oh, actually I guess it does make a lot of sense. And yeah, so many people have told me, oh, I really love the way that those chapters are called that. But yeah, I mean, it just felt like, because what ended up being kind of obvious about how I wanted the book to be laid out was that this was a book about, myths about women and gender, right? And that these kind of stories that have been told about what women can and can't do have always been a shifting goalpost. And like, that's how we know that they're fake, right? It's just not real. And so like, let's go through these stories that have been told about women, because you would bring up one thing maybe in an article or something like that, and people are shocked to know that like, oh, women weren't allowed to run more than 800 meters in the, like, this is crazy, right? It's crazy to think that. And they were told they would literally, not be able to have children, or they might die or whatever. And so one thing, right, is shocking, or you're not able to wrap your head really around it. But if you see it in order, right, and like in that historical timeline and how things changed, that made it just made a lot of sense to me in terms of like, okay, this is a book that's, yes, it's about women and running and it's about sport, but it's also just about the stories we tell about gender and how wrong they've been.
What was the most illuminating part of your research for this book?
Oh gosh. Great question. It's hard to remember. I think for me, like, one of the things that really just shocked me and sort of like made me realize like, oh, this is why this book is important, which I think is another thing we deal with as writers, is like, as you're writing it, you're like, is this actually important? Like, does anyone care about this or not know about any of this yet? Was putting together the marathon chapter and seeing how, that women's Olympic marathon did not exist until 1984. Like, that is crazy. And then to think that like these women who were sneaking into marathons in the 60s, like that was my mom's childhood. And so like that to me was really the illuminating moment. Was I was like, oh, like my mom is one generation removed from me. She wasn't athletic. She didn't do sports. She didn't have any of those opportunities, right? But she loved sports. She actually loved baseball. She wanted to be a baseball player when she was little. I was definitely off limits. And, and then one generation later, I was this like sporty Spice Girl generation girl being told like, yeah, you can do anything. And like, of course you are going to play soccer your whole life and all of that. And that to me was like, oh, okay, this is why societally we still have this like huge complex about women athletes and like paying them what they're worth, or even like seeing them as impressive and things like that, because this is really recent history. And so that to me was really amazing. And even some of the women in the beginning of the book from the early 1900s, some of them hadn't died that recently, or that long ago. And I was able to talk with, their children or their grandchildren. And that, in and of itself is, more proof that like, this is just really the last 100 years that we've been kind of figuring out how this all works.
Mm. Yeah, and one of the more gripping chapters, just for me, was the one you wrote with on Mary Decker Slaney, and just the arc of her career and the trajectory of her career, which just when you're writing something like that, and just how are you going about telling that story, building that chapter, and what does she represent?
Oh yeah, that was a hard one to write, just in terms of topic, right? Because it is really emotional, and it's really, it's close to home. It's what so many women athletes of my generation have gone through, is this kind of like struggle with body image and eating disorders, and things like that. And building her story was really a matter of doing a lot of archival research. I mean, as well as I that she's a little bit of a hermit. And so, that was about looking at what, and it kind of worked too for the chapter that like, writing about sort of what the media said about her throughout her life became a really important component of it. So that was really, I did hunt down there were a couple of books that I read about her, and then just so much archivable newspaper and magazine research, sort of putting together her timeline and finding those things of like, okay, what did we think of like this girl who came on the scene as a runner, when meanwhile like women are still trying to like prove they can run marathons over here, and then she comes on as like this 13-year-old running marathons and like breaking all of these records. And how did that jive with this societal picture we had of what little girls should look like, or what athletes look like? And so yeah, her story was very interesting. And then as with all of the chapters, it was kind of also about figuring out what are those contextual pieces and historical pieces and scientific pieces that are going to come in and kind of complement that story. And for her, obviously it really became about that whole era of women athletes who were just totally under the microscope, in terms of what they looked like, and how much they weighed, and like these just things we would never be allowed and should not say about women athletes today. So yeah, putting that all together was really great because she was covered so much. There is like a ton of information about her, and some of these other things that have been written about her were really helpful. At the same time, I knew I was kind of coming at it from a different perspective, because I'm coming at it from a different era, and talking about like things like RED-S and relative energy deficiency syndrome, and looking at her injuries sort of through that lens, when we don't know that that's really what happened to her. We don't have her medical records or things like that, but like she fits the frame of this problem that was like very, very ever present. And yeah, she suffered so many injuries, and today that those would be huge red flags. And yeah, and being able to kind of tie her story to then like the Mary Cain story, which people know I think a lot better these days, was for me kind of an obvious choice. And then it wasn't until later that I found out that like actually Mary Decker had been often asked about Mary Cain when she was on her way up, and they did have all of these different connections that I hadn't even realized. And so it's one of those things that was kind of like the magic came together as I was doing the writing.
Yeah, I know. I when we spoke in Seattle, you and I both said like we tried to reach Mary for our various projects, and I couldn't, and you couldn't either. What were we were talking about phone calls earlier, and maybe the one shot you get at people. What were some things that you would have threads you really wanted to pull on with her if she was going to give you an hour on the phone?
Oh gosh, I mean, I know. Well, the one thing was she had been asked about kind of like, oh, do you think you were overtrained? Like she was asked that in her later careers, because she did try to keep running. Like she kept trying to come back. And at some point people started asking her, oh, do you think you were overtrained? And she was always like, no, I wasn't overtrained. And so I felt like, she probably wouldn't say anything different at this point, but, who knows? And I would have, yeah, wanted to ask her about just like, were you ever told things about like how much you should weigh or what you should be eating? Like runners were just never taught like real good nutritional advice until like very recently.
Yeah.
So that would be, one thing I would have really wanted to talk to her about. Of course, I would want to talk to her about Alberto Salazar, but I'm sure she would not also want to talk about that, since they had a very close relationship. And, just kind of, yeah, where she sort of sees herself. I think the other kind of tragic part about Mary is, that by the end, she really can't run at all anymore. And that was really this thing that brought her so much joy. So that would be another thing I would want to ask about.
Yeah, that's the way men wrote about women and girls back then was so icky. And I know with Fran Worthen, who grew up in Coos Bay, was a sprinter who a few years younger than Steve Prefontaine. She had a story written on her in Sports Illustrated because she was a brilliant sprinter and a long jumper. And like in the lead, it was just something like the 19-year-old Fran, the 19-year-old freckled lovely or something. It was like how he described him, like, ew. It was like so gross. How
Yeah, and that
it
was
was
like, I mean,
integral
so
to the
common.
storytelling of women in athletics was how they looked and how cute they were, and it was
Yeah, and
yeah.
even, I mean, it's still, I mean, that was a problem just like 10 years ago, right? Like, it was still like, okay, like Alex Morgan got the most like sponsorship money because she was considered the prettiest one on the team. Like it's just like this stuff that like we are still dealing with maybe in different ways, and like that has been kind of like called out finally. But yeah, I mean, you think about even just like 10-20 years ago, the way people were allowed to talk about women in general, who were on their TVs, like it's shifted a lot.
Yeah. Well, and when you finished the book and went through, the publicity and the promotion of it, and then you've been away from it, about better part of a year, more or less. It came out in 24. Just how are you thinking of books and book writing now that you have this one under your belt? And how long did it take you to kind of come out of this one to maybe think about another?
The $1 million question. Whew. I mean, it's been a roller coaster. I think that books they're an interesting process, right? There's so many. I mean, I used to hate listening to writers talk about like the terrible things about writing books, because like before I wrote a book I was like, shut up, like at least you wrote a book and you got it published.
Yeah.
Like you are the goal, right? So I say this with a grain of salt, and like knowing that like I know this was, for me, like this was a lifetime goal, like, and I feel so happy and so lucky with the way that it all turned out. And at the same time, it's a really difficult industry. I have these talks with my agent all the time now about like no one buys nonfiction books, and this is just like, the numbers are fine for the time period we're in, and like also being like a women's sports book is like a whole other thing that's like you're in this totally niche, like, okay,
Yeah.
good job if you sold any. So yeah, you kind of like get pushed through this roller coaster of like, okay, but what's the next thing you should be worried about in terms of your book? Like, are you gonna get the right publicity? Are you gonna like sell enough copies? Is anyone gonna come to your book events? All of that stuff.
Oh yeah.
And it goes up and down, right? It's like, oh, I have one great event and it's perfect, and then I do something else and I am like, no one came, or no one, it's like, so you have to kind of, for me it became very much like, okay, like this obviously isn't about me. there are there are bigger issues happening, and you take the wins where you get them. When you have a really great event, or get someone who writes to you about how much they love the book, like, oh my god, what a gift, and like what a thing to like be able to do. And and making sure that I like see my therapist a lot, just to like get through these like questions of like maybe it was all a waste. But yeah, I mean, I think I knew that I wanted to keep writing books, and I've definitely sort of struggled, I think, in the last several months, as I've been like, okay, I think I'm starting to get ready to like dive into more research and maybe start a proposal again. And part of you is like, is it worth it? Is this gonna be like, what am I gonna get out of this one? I don't know. I do think that there's still something so special about books and about writing a book. And to me now, knowing that like, this is a really hard time. I mean, it's a really hard time to like be alive, let alone like be a book writer. That hopefully you're writing books that people are gonna pick up 10-20 years from now, right, and still read. And so I think that's what's really special about it, especially after being this freelance writer who's written mostly online for my entire career. And, sometimes you put so much of yourself into that work, and it kind of like is a drop in the bucket of the internet, and you never hear about it again.
Mhm.
So I think the book is special for that like, oh, this is something that ideally stays in print. And if I write another book, maybe people will love that book and then find this book because of that, So, thinking about it as something with a much longer tail and hopefully, lasting power, I think does make it worth it. But yeah, the industry is definitely a big question mark and does make me kind of wonder what else I might have to do
Yeah.
down the line.
Did you experience kind of a post-book malaise or a funk, just as after it was published and thinking about something else? Just that's something I've experienced, and I just wonder maybe how you've wrestled with it.
Yeah. I think there was maybe like 3 or 4 months after, there's kind of, you have those little bumps, or like I did a little like fall tour like during marathon season, and then had a couple like holiday market things, and like post that, like, yeah, I mean, you start to wonder, and yeah, like, was it all worth it? Or what's the point in trying to do it again, if
Yeah.
like, oh, this, that there's going to be more disappointment in the future. So yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, I think it is something that probably just changes as you go on regardless, right? Like, and hopefully, I mean, you've written 2 books, so maybe you have a different perspective, but I'm like, I kind of want to get that second book under my belt so that I have like, it's not all just on this one
Yeah.
baby,
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much just the idea of, because I just know how much research goes into it, and you're like, oh my god, you gotta start over with like, I have a monster master spreadsheet. I think we kind of talked about this, how we're organize the work, and it's just like thinking of like populating that all over again for another project. Like, oh boy, just the inertia of trying to get it started. It's sometimes overwhelming to the point where like I just don't want to do it, but I know I have to, and I know it's fun. It really is fun work when you're in a groove of good research. You're like, oh wow, this is so cool, and I'm going to be able to cook with these ingredients and really shape something that should be evocative and fun and propulsive. Like that's where the juice is a lot. But to get started again, when you realize how much work, Better, Faster, Farther was for you, like, oh my God, it's so much, and you gotta start somewhere. You can't write the book in one go. It's the whole like running metaphor of it being a marathon and not a sprint is very on point. It's just these little drops, one little step, and it does. It adds up if you trust that process. You get there, but it can be hard to start again.
Oh yeah. No, I have like piles of, I do another part of my like research process is I go online and buy all these like used like old academic books and stuff on topics. And so I've done that for like my next, like what I think I'm going to be writing about. And so I have like piles of books that I need to read. But I bought them. So that is the first step. I like have them and I'm looking.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Well, I can't wait to see what you might turn those into, Maggie. So, but as I want to be mindful of your time here, and as I bring these conversations down for a landing, I always love asking the guests for a recommendation for the listeners, and that's just like anything you're excited about. And so I'll just extend that to you, Maggie. What would you recommend for the listeners out there?
Oh my gosh, put me on the spot. Well, I recommend working out. Can I say this? Running, even if you like don't consider yourself a runner, is very fun. I've actually like that's been one of the best things from getting the book out and like becoming a little bit more of a runner myself, but also like hearing from people who are like, oh, I never thought of myself as a runner, and I just kind of like wanted to try it out after I read your book, or like, got into one of these little couch to 5K programs. And it's like, I think we all need like so many more endorphins at this moment in time just to like survive what we are all going through. And for me, that's meant like running and like me lifting weights. And I think if you've ever not done either of those, you should try them, because I think we all need just like I mean, if you're a writer, like you just like have to get out of your head sometimes. And you also probably need some like good routine, like endorphin making. So that is my recommendation, because it is what's been working for me in terms of just like staying on top of mental health and like not falling into those like deep ravines of self-doubt. Doing this work not because you're like, yeah, trying to win a race or like whatever, get super buff, but it's like I just want to like feel like strong enough to do the things I need to do, right? And like and like feeling strong in your body actually does like really boost your confidence, really help you like just feel like more capable. And yeah, I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, we need more of that energy in the world for sure. So, but oh, Maggie, so great that we got to talk on the mics for this. You know, as you know, I loved your book, and yeah, I can't recommend it enough for people. So just thanks for carving out the time and sharing your time and sharing your work with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Brendan. It's been a joy to get to know you over the past few months.
Oh yes. Oh, that was awesome. Yes. What a nice time with Maggie. She interviewed me at Elliott Bay Book Company back in July to an audience filled with CNF Pod listeners Sam Jeffries and Mark Armstrong. I desperately needed to return the favor for Maggie. This podcast will reach more than 5 people, in theory. Don't forget about ordering signed, personalized copies of The Frontrunner. For the reader in your life, email me and I'll invoice you through PayPal an invoice for $30. That includes media rate shipping. And be sure you're subbed at Pitch Club or The Rager. Ideally, both. There are any number of people out there raging against the algorithm. I think Seth Werkheiser of Social Media Escape Club, like I think of him among others. I like his thinking, as it resonates and rhymes with my own. He's just more popular, so his ideas have a bit more reach. But I've long been raging, you know that. And a lot of the things he says is like, yeah, it's like nothing new under the sun, let's say that. I remember back in the day when I was frustrated when blog posts didn't get much traction, no comments, and it just seemed pointless. But now I don't care at all, really. I like that my little internet garden gets the best of me, and that people who might seek me out will have a library worth of stuff to browse with not a whiff of an algorithm. You can just dig around, you can search around for any number of terms in the little search bar, and you might find something cool. You know, nothing nefarious, no data tracking. You may find some inspiration or a cool writing hack, or maybe just a philosophical riff, something probably spawned while I was out jogging. For many years, we stopped giving our websites the best of us because our websites weren't optimized to spread and connect the way social media is engineered to do and lock us in. For a long time before Facebook really re-engineered things, people just like, oh, I'll just set up an author page and put all my shit on Facebook, and then as everybody knows by now, they change things so that even the people who follow you, you got to pay to get them or pay to appear in their feeds. Even these people who elected to see you. Just so shady. But that's the enshittification of the internet. And speaking of that, we'll have Cory Doctorow on the show with his new book, Enshittification, coming up in December sometime. So we started shoveling coal into that furnace, and as a result, we have these fallow, untended, outdated websites that are websites in name only. They're ghost towns. You know, who lived here? What happened to this place? Fact is, next to nobody is seeing our shit on social media anyway. So we might as well fully own it, right? Honestly, I don't trust Substack. I don't even trust Beehive, my 2 newsletter services these days, which is why I'm basically publishing first to those platforms, what I normally do on the first of the month, then publishing them on my website as blogs. This way, if Substack gets all weird or they start changing or they make you increasingly invisible unless you pull in money, I'll always have my content on my property. I'd like to spruce up my website a bit, but then I think, well, why? It's pretty lean as it is. It's pretty slick. It doesn't have 1,000 tabs on the menu. It's got a rail of things that I like to peruse myself, and then I think is an easy jumping off point for people who might just be visiting. Oh, here's a good place to start. I wish I could separate my podcast show notes from blog posts, and I'm sure there's a way, but I might need to hire someone to optimize that. Or not, I don't know. We all know that on some level it's better to own than to rent. And social media overlords are slumlords, and we pay them data, sometimes we pay them money, and we definitely give them too much of our attention. And for what? There's an illusion of connection, an illusion of reach. So don't give them the best you've got. Easier said than done, but fight it as best you can. I'm doing my best. It's not always great, but I'm trying. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.